Welcome to today's webinar. For those of you who don't know, my name is David Gazai, and I'm the Director of Member Services and Learning at Orchestras Canada, and my pronouns are he, him. I'm a white male with brown hair, and you can see white doors and more white doors, I guess, in the background. I'll keep my introduction short, but I would like to mention that Orchestras Canada is a virtual organization. I respectfully acknowledge that my home office is in Kingston, Ontario, on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Huron-Wendat. I recognize the importance of this land to the Indigenous people who have lived and continue to live here, people whose practices and spiritualities were connected to the land and who continue to develop in relationship to the land and its other inhabitants today. I invite everyone to tell us from which territories you are joining in the discussion. This webinar was put together in the hope of shedding some light on the Integrated Media Agreement for Canada so that everyone attending has a better idea of what is and isn't allowed when it comes to marketing. Our speaker for today is Richard Sandals, who is the Associate Director of Symphonic Services Division at the Canadian Federation of Musicians. He is for many a reference when it comes to this agreement, so this made things really easy for us when we're looking for someone to discuss it. Richard will start with a presentation on the document you have all received in an email from me at around 12:30 p.m. today. We will then leave some time for any questions you might have, so feel free to type them in the chat or raise your hand during that period. We will be sure to make the document you were emailed around 12:30 p.m. today available on our website so that everyone can refer to it in the future. I will now pass the mic to Richard.
Thanks, David. Welcome, everybody. What I'm going to do today is basically kind of talk through and give a little bit more detail on the document that you received. The document has both a kind of bullet point summary of what we're going to talk about today, but then also the full language of the relevant portions of the IMAC itself at the end, so that if you need to check for more detail, or if somebody's saying, hey, that's not right, you can look that up and see the full language, because there's a few places where I'm not going to give all of the gory details about some of these provisions. So before I kind of start into the document, I think many of you know a little bit about the IMAC, but I'll just give you a little bit more background. So the Integrated Media Agreement is an agreement that's negotiated between the AFM and a group called the EMA, the Employers Media Association, which represents about 100 and some US orchestras. And that's had 3 versions of it going back to about 2009. And we haven't been able to use it in Canada because it has provisions that conflict with Canadian national agreements, such as the CBC agreement. So what we had started on pre-COVID and accelerated during COVID was, as kind of a starting place to get orchestras more media tools, was basically taking that agreement and crossing out the parts that don't work in Canada and promulgating it so that orchestras could sign on. The next step will be a negotiated version, the next version of this agreement. As you may have noticed, this agreement already expired last July, but orchestras can continue to sign on to it and to continue to use it. But the next step will be a negotiated agreement. So obviously I don't know what that negotiated agreement is going to look like, but I would be shocked if the promotional things changed in a way that was negative. I think it's a powerful agreement for allowing orchestras to do what I think we all want you to be able to do, which is encourage people to buy tickets and donate money. So I'm going to just share my screen, which is essentially it's a slightly different formatted version of the document that you all have. And if there are, I think David has asked you to put questions in the chat. If there's something that is radically confusing or contradictory about what I've said, I think there's few enough people in here that I'm not worried if you want to just blurt it out, so that we can if there's anything that's unclear, that we can clear it up as we go. So, the basic principle behind the IMAC is that it enables and encourages orchestras to create, as you can see here, to create promotional content for distribution on your platforms. So it's really about having you create content that goes on your platforms, because that is what helps you sell tickets, build public profile, and attract donors. The musicians work for you, and when you benefit, they're going to benefit. So use by third parties is only permitted when it's directly promoting the orchestra, not the third party. So that's the kind of general framework and the philosophy underlying this agreement. One of the things, just as a kind of a technical point, I'm going to talk about capture, and I'm going to talk about release, and those are two different things. There are a lot of cases where the IMAC allows you to capture entire performances for archival purpose, or capture 40 minutes to use for promotional purposes. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're allowed to release that full amount. So it's a good thing to keep in mind that when you see capture, it doesn't necessarily mean that you can release that and that full amount. And I'll get into the specifics of that as I get to each provision as we go. The other question that the IMAC needs to deal with is, what is promotion? Obviously, a lot of what orchestras do is not in the electronic media world is not designed to generate revenue. It's designed to generate profile and attract donors and all that sort of stuff. And so there's a question of what is promotion and what is free distribution of content. And the answer in the IMAC is basically duration. We don't look at the nature of the product. Anything that's longer than 15 minutes is probably going to be considered content and need to be paid for. But there's a fair bit of flexibility in distributing things that are shorter than that. And because the IMAC is so new, most of your collective agreements have some sort of news and promotion provisions. In general, the IMAC supersedes those. There's, I'll point out that that anytime you see this, that means that there's a reference in the document that's pointing to. But 8C6 says that this supersedes news and promotion provisions in your agreement as long as it's better. So if the news and promotion in your agreement is superior to this from your perspective, then it supersedes the IMAC. Otherwise, the IMAC supersedes your collective agreement. So you get whichever slate of provisions is better. So, and to be clear, that's not pick and choose, order from this menu and this menu and this menu. You get either the IMAC or the collective agreement news and promotion provisions. I can't think of an orchestra in Canada where the IMAC is not the superior agreement for that. Okay, so what can the orchestra do? So the orchestra can generate promotional content for distribution on your website and social media, and websites that you control. So you can capture up to 40 minutes. So this is that capture and release thing. You can capture up to 40 minutes from any rehearsal or performance to edit down to create promotional content. Now, and there's a specific version that the orchestra committee can authorize longer capture. So if you go to your orchestra committee and say, we would like to be able to just capture the full dress rehearsal, they can authorize that. They can authorize that on a project basis, or they can authorize it on a season basis, or whatever basis they want to do. It's up to the orchestra committee to decide what and how they want to authorize that. I think in a lot of cases, where it says the orchestra committee can authorize, I think it's a good idea to sit down with your orchestra committee and come to some kind of agreement on at least a season basis, because I think we all have too much to do to be having conversations about how many minutes you can record from a particular rehearsal. One of the other things that this agreement allows that has not always been allowed in individual collective agreements is the use of archival promotion material for promotional content. So if you're doing Beethoven 5 and you have archival of the last time you did Beethoven 5 3 years ago, you can use that archival content in your promotional content, subject to these same limitations. So that allows you to not have to wait until the dress rehearsal to have promotional content. So how much can you use? Each promotional item can be up to 15 minutes in length, provided that no individual segment is longer than 5 minutes. And obviously, if you want, you could be 3 minutes long total, and just that segment is the full length, the full 3 minutes or 5 minutes. So each promotional item can be 15 minutes in length. And that's not, you can do 15 minutes worth of promotion per program. That's each promotional item. So if you wanted to create 35 different promotional items about one single concert, you can do that, provided that each promotional item obeys that restriction. And then in addition to that, up to 6 times per year, you can create promotional items that use 15 minutes of continuous content. So that could be an entire overture or something like that. But each of those 15-minute items has to be from a different work. And this again gets back to that content versus promotion question. You can't do 4 15-minute promotional items that are the first, second, third, and fourth movements of a symphony. So that's your basic. This is the most important thing that I would say. If you remember one thing, if you remember 2 things, these are the 2 things: your website and social media, and 15 minutes, no individual segment longer than 5. So there are a couple of other opportunities you can use. So there are a couple of opportunities to actually stream a full performance without additional payment. And by a couple, I mean exactly 2. So once per season, however season is defined in your collective agreement, whatever the start and end dates of your season are, you can stream a concert that was free to the public on your platforms for 45 days without additional payment. So if you have some kind of community event that's free to the public, you can stream that on your platform for 45 days. And if there's a nominal ticket price, you can go to your orchestra committee and say, okay, this was $5, or this was a can of tuna for the food bank. Can we still use this provision? And that's up to them to approve or reject that proposal. So once per season, you can stream a free concert for up to 45 days. In addition, once per season, you can stream a concert that was not free to the public. To do that, first you need the permission of the orchestra. That's the full orchestra, not just the orchestra committee. So probably you want to approach your committee and ask them to put it to a vote. And it's the same restrictions on your platforms for 45 days. So those are the 2 times per year under this agreement that you can stream a full concert without additional payment. And if you did have a concert, you could use this. If you had 2 free concerts that you wanted to stream, you could use this provision for a concert that was free. So you could do 2 free ones, or 1 free one and 1 paid one. So one of the things that was really important for us in getting this agreement out, and I think orchestras made good use of during the early part of the lockdown, was the volunteer promotional recordings. So volunteer promotional recordings are for distribution on your platforms, and they can include interviews, performances, demonstrations, that kind of thing. So these are the kind of things that we saw in the early COVID, the sort of, okay, here's our principal cello, here she is making soup, here's her cat, here she is playing a Bach suite, those kinds of things. So you can create that, those kinds of projects. And so they're really great for building engagement on about the individuals that make up your orchestra. So they are, as you might deduce from the title, they are voluntary, so you cannot make people do them. And the opportunities to participate should need to be equitable and suitable. So each year you notify the orchestra, or on whatever basis you say, hey, we want to create some of these, people can volunteer. And that's how that's supposed to work. And you are expected to try to not have it be the same person every time. So when you create these volunteer promotional recordings, you can capture up to 45 minutes, and then the resulting product must be 15 minutes or less. So again, we have the release and capture being different times. And if the musician is paid, the time limits for that capture and duration may be extended if the orchestra committee approves and the federation approves. The musician's approval is required for the release of that product. and then it must be removed if they request it. So if they say, hey, I've changed my hair, I don't want that online anymore, you take it down. And you can combine what you create as a VPR with other promotional content. So if you wanted to have the cellist and their cat and they're practicing their concerto in their basement, and now here they are from the concert footage, you can do that. You can mix those in together to create a nice narrative. So those are the uses that the orchestra can make directly. And one of the things I want to emphasize is that there are times when you're going to get requests for a third party to use this stuff, to do promotion, a guest artist or whatever. There are sometimes ways that can work, but in general, the simplest way to do that is for the orchestra to share it, and for those third parties to share that link, embed the video that's on your website, link to it, because you have a great deal of latitude in what you can share. Third parties don't. But if it's on your website and they're pointing to it, that makes life a lot easier for everybody. And it ensures that you're the ones getting the views and you're the ones getting the engagement, not the guest artist. And now that I say this, I think there's a bullet point about this later, but since I started talking about third parties, I thought I would mention that. So news. It's the same capture as other promotional use. You can capture up to 40 minutes, or if the orchestra committee has approved, a longer time, whether that's 60 minutes or a full concert or whatever. This captured content must be edited down to 10 minutes. So the use for news is 10 minutes, and there can't be any complete works longer than 4 minutes. So you could have a complete work that is 3.5 minutes long, but you can't have a complete work that's 5 minutes long. And that's whether you're creating that, edited footage for them, or whether they're doing it themselves. So 10 minutes, no complete works that are longer than 4 minutes. And obviously, unless you're doing something really right, they're not putting 4 minutes of you on the evening news. So if they only air a shorter extract, they can still have the full 10 minutes on their own website. So if the local TV news puts 30 seconds on the evening news, they can have the 10-minute clip on the associated link on their website. And this can also be used by newspapers. So if the local newspaper does a feature, they can share that 10 minutes on their website link from the article or whatever. Hey, there it is. I just said this, so I won't say it again. There are some options for third-party stuff, but if you share it, that makes life so much easier. And one thing I will add on this point is, if you want to give the third party the rough footage and say, say, hey, you pick out the spots you like, and they edit it down and give it back to you, and you put your title cards and whatever on that, that's fine. I encourage orchestras to make the third parties do the work and then just post it on your platforms. So when a third party is directly promoting orchestra activities, they get the same use that the orchestra does. So that's 15 minutes, no segments longer than 5 minutes. And that requires direct promotion of your activities. So for example, tickets, subscriptions, donations, media sales, they need to be promoting sales of those things. So the typical examples, if you don't run your box office, that would be your venues and tours or runouts. If you have somebody doing fundraising for you, a third party doing fundraising for you, that would be another example. But that has to be direct promotion of your activities. The other example of this is if there is an opera or ballet company that subcontracts your orchestra pursuant to your collective agreement, so they're using collective agreement services, they can use this same provision only when they are promoting events where the orchestra is engaged. So if the ballet company engages you for their Nutcracker, and they can use these promotional provisions to promote Nutcracker. But if the following week they're doing something that doesn't involve your orchestra, they're on their own. They don't get to use this. And again, the same philosophy. We want to drive engagement and visibility to the orchestra, not to these third parties. And those opera and ballet subcontractors can also use up to 2 of the 6 opportunities per year to create the 15 minutes straight. So if you have an opera company that subcontracts your orchestra, and they want to do a 15-minute segment from some opera, as you can let them use up to 2 of your 6 15 minutes straight. So the other case is where there is no direct promotion. And this is a little bit more complicated. First of all, there's less of it. So when there's no direct promotion of an orchestra activity, and this is by a third party, this is 5 minutes. 5 minutes is the limit, how much they can use. And I've quoted the language directly from the agreement here because there's a lot of nuance here. And if you're in doubt, drop me an email and we'll talk. The third party must be an institutional or media partner or sponsor of the engager, or must be engaged in some other meaningful partnership with the engager, which advances community or institutional goals beyond the commercial or non-commercial success of the third party and advances awareness of the orchestra. So what does that mean? So some examples are, I know some of your orchestras have long-time associations with community choirs. So they wouldn't qualify as an opera or ballet subcontractor, but those choirs that you work with on an ongoing basis, you do a couple of co-productions every year, those would qualify as a third party. Some of you have associations with local charities, Diabetes Association or whatever, and you put on some kind of a event. That would be an example of an organization that could use this. And then if you have a long-standing, like major sponsor, and they want to create a video that highlights not their product, but their support of your orchestra. Hey, look how great we are. These are the wonderful musicians who we're supporting, and look at how great the stuff is. That's another possibility. This does not include guest artists. It does not include those kinds of third parties. These are institutional media partners, sponsors, right? So, if you have a situation where you think that this might be applicable, let me know. And because the AFM must be notified of this use, and I'm happy to have a conversation about it about before, so we can make sure it works. And the orchestra committee has to approve, and then there's a release that third party would have to sign. So that's the indirect promotion. So when you're doing promotion, there's a certain amount of ability to use paid for product as well. So if the orchestra has acquired the product, the right to distribute it under Article 10, which is the multi-platform release, which is, for those of you who are signatory, that's the main rate. You're familiar with it. For most of you, it's 93.64. So that provides that the content can be used in whole, in single or multiple parts, in perpetuity on any platform covered by the IMAC. So you can use paid for content for promotion without all of those restrictions that I just said, because you've paid for it. You can use it. If it generates revenue, if that promotion generates direct revenue, like YouTube ad revenue or whatever, it is subject to the revenue participation provisions, which you probably don't want to know about. But the point is, if it does generate revenue, it's still treated the way as other revenue. But you can use that content for promotion. And that can be licensed to third parties as well. So this is an opportunity where if you have paid for the product and a third party says, look, you premiered my piece, you distributed that on your paid channels, can I license that to use as part of on my YouTube channel to promote that work? That's a possibility. So all licensing of IMAC requires AFM and orchestra committee approval. So you should whether you could probably approach both of us at the same time and say, here's what I would like to do. Can I do it? What are the terms? Those terms are going to depend on who's licensing the content and what they're going to be allowed to do with it. If you're licensing content to Justin Bieber and they're going to make a record out of it, if he's going to make a record out of it, you're going to be paying for that. If it's somebody who arranged a piece for a kid's concert, I can think of situations where orchestra committees have said, that's fine. As long as they're not misusing it, as long as they're not generating revenue, they can put it on their YouTube channel for free. we'll give them 5 minutes. So those license terms could be anywhere from 0 to whatever. So one other thing I wanted to mention on this is that guest artists and composers are generally going to be permitted to receive archival recordings, depending on exactly what you've agreed to with your orchestra committee, but they cannot publicly distribute that archival recording or any portion of it. They can use it for a grant application, they can use it for personal study and edification, but they cannot publicly distribute it. And if you do license something to a third party, and this is regardless of whether it's for promotion or for other purposes, licensing is not in perpetuity. That's to ensure that orchestras get to manage and maintain their legacies, that they don't get signed off in perpetuity and it goes away and then that recording gets deleted and you never see it again. So all licenses are limited to 5 years except under certain circumstances. So there's a section, so that most of that is dealt with in Article 8. Article 9 in the IMAC deals with donor gifts. I really want to highlight this first paragraph because there's been confusion on this. There's a section on donor gifts, and it does not restrict the orchestra's ability to give away copies of paid-for media products. So if you've made a CD and you've got a box of CDs in your office, and you can do whatever you want with that. You've paid for that product. You can give it to donors in their swag bag. You can give it to people who come by the office. It does not restrict your ability to give away paid for product. What it does is provide an opportunity to create donor gifts without paying extra money to the musicians. So there are basically two forms this can take, and the nitty gritty is essentially the same. So once per year, you can create a donor gift for individuals who donate at least $250 or whatever it takes to get program recognition, whichever is greater. And then that can be one of two things. It can be a CD, DVD, or download. You can create a maximum of 1,000 units, except you can ask for permission from the orchestra committee to do more. If the orchestra committee asks for it, the musicians also get a copy. So you can do a, kind of an old school thing where you want to send a CD of the greatest hits of last year to your 1,000 best donors. That's the option. Or you can create a donor portal on your website. So a password protected area where people who are eligible can log in and watch this content. You can have maximum of 90 minutes of content available at any time. You can swap that around during the year if you want, but there can't be more than 90 minutes available at any time. And it's for on-demand streaming, no downloads. If you want to create a downloadable product, you're back up here. So in either of these cases, the orchestra committee's approval is required, and that includes artistic approval and repertoire approval. So if you say, hey, we want to put this on it, and the orchestra committee says, we don't like that piece, we thought that piece stank, then they can refuse to approve that product. So the donor gifts are something that you can use to create, sort of enticements for some of your donors. And there's an extra opportunity here, which is actually the second point here. So twice per year, you can provide subscribers or multi-ticket buyers with a free download or limited access for up to 2 weeks access to the donor portal. So you can use this as an incentive if you're trying to get people to donate more and you have an active donor portal. You could say, okay, so anybody who's bought a certain number of tickets can have access. Here you go. Here's access to our donor portal. Come and check that out. And if you donate more money, you'll have permanent access to that. And then if you have a major sponsor or underwriter and you want to create a CD or DVD gift, you can do that. Come and ask. Okay, so that's that. That's the end of the document. I see some questions, which I think I will just start taking. For the streaming of the not free concert, does that require a unanimous or majority vote? It requires a majority vote. So it's not a unanimous approval required. I think that's a couple of questions. Yeah, but the orchestra committee will yeah, that's exactly right. The orchestra committee can decide how to manage that vote. Can I elaborate on orchestras' platforms? I think we've been fairly generous in how we interpret that. So, your website, obviously, if there are, social media that you control. So if it's on Instagram, YouTube, we regard YouTube as social media, Facebook, Twitter, all that stuff. And if there are other, some orchestras have used something like Vimeo or something like that for distribution. And obviously you don't control Vimeo, but you control your spot on that. So not Spotify, not Apple Music, but if it's something where you have control over how that's distributed, you can go on there, you can yank it immediately. I think that's how we regard that. Does that answer that question from whomever that was? Let me know if that's
it does. Thanks, Richard.
Thanks. Has this superseded the old Oxum archival and all that? If you are signatory to the IMAC, take those any old releases and throw them away. They are no longer valid. So the IMAC has an archival release, and it has a third-party promotional release. There may be cases where we create a specific release for a specific project. I have a number of templates for licensing things that we've done when we've done kind of friendly licenses that were not overly complicated, did not need to get lawyers involved. So if there is a particular situation that's not covered by, those are Exhibit C and Exhibit D in the IMAC, if you have a situation, just let me know and we can knock together something that will work for anything. But yeah, you can throw away those old agreements and releases. Yeah, so what about content that was captured prior to becoming an IMAC signatory? That's an excellent question. And so, because a number of you were signatory to the standalone COVID agreement in 2021, and then subsequently became signatory to the IMAC. So what we essentially look at that content, unless it was paid for, because some of that ended up getting paid for in some way, unless it was paid for content, we regard that as archival content. So anything in this agreement that once you become signatory to the IMAC, essentially we regard anything that you created as archival content or side letter content in the past, we regard that right now as if it's archival content. And so that's how it would be treated. Does that address that? Question? I think one of the strengths of the IMAC is that it, instead of having these situations where your archival content and some of your promotion are governed by your collective agreement, and then things you've created for distribution are governed by limited pressing or CCPR or CBC agreement or any one of the myriad tangle of federation agreements. As much as possible, we can run everything through the IMAC so it's clear how those things all interact. And what if I wanted to turn this thing from an archival into a distributed thing? What do I have to do? The IMAC has an answer for that. So this probably isn't going to be relevant to a lot of the conversations, what we're focusing on, promotion. But if an orchestra does have archival content that they wish to turn into paid for content, there is a provision in the IMAC for that. So we can talk about how that can happen if somebody wants to do that. So are there, actually, I see a question in the chat. One of the really critical parts of the IMAC is that all of the content you create under the IMAC must be content that you own. So if the orchestra is not going to own the content, you cannot use the IMAC. There are various different, there's a swarm of complicated agreements that we can navigate together. And so if there's a situation where a third party needs to own the content, drop me an email and we'll figure out what the best way to manage that is. But it's not the IMAC. It can be licensed to third parties, but it cannot be owned by third parties. And that is a line which I cannot cross under any circumstances. Oh, sure. So hi, Brent. What is paid for? So when I say paid for, I mean if you've paid for it under Article 10 or the educational provisions in Article 16 of the IMAC. So for you guys, that's the 9364. There's another thing for educational content. So you've paid for the media rights to that product. So in your case, I can tell you that would, like, for instance, you release some NMF stuff, right? That was paid for content. So that is, the musicians were paid through their EMG for that, and so you can distribute that basically at your discretion. Yes. That's so. If there are further questions, I'm absolutely happy to take further questions. But as otherwise, that's all I have for today.
All right. Are there any last minute questions? All right. Word of thanks. And more of these. So it looks like you answered all the questions people had, which is amazing. Thank you so much, Richard, for taking the time to go over this with our attendees today. I wanted to let everyone know that by popular demand, we will be sharing both the document emailed to you today, as well as the recording of this session on our website, so that it is accessible to all. So you'll be able to find this in the resource page, as it is for all of our other webinars. Again, thank you so much, Richard, and thank you for attending.
I will say before you kick me out, I'll just say one thing, which is I know this is complicated. I know it's a mess. One of my desires for the second version of this agreement in Canada is for it to be a little bit more straightforward. I think that the basic value proposition is good for both sides. I'd love to see the next version be a little bit more straightforward to read. But that also links into, if you have questions, my email's in the, I mean, many of you have my email already, and it's in the document that you received. Please feel free to ask. I'm happy to answer questions about this. And I think that, my goal is to make sure, I want to get musicians paid, and creating promotional stuff that helps you do that is something we all want to do. And so very often, I'll get a question which says, can I do A? And I say, well, you can't quite do A, but here's a suggestion for how, let's work together and figure out how we can get something that gets you almost exactly what you want, but stays strictly within the parameters of this agreement. And I'm really happy to do that. So please don't hesitate to ask me if you've got something that you think is kind of just on the edge, because very often there's a way we can find to make it work, as long as it is, a legit promotional opportunity.
Great. Yeah, so again, thank you so much for everybody to attend today, and have a great day, everyone.